and gentlemen, good evening. David Clues broadcasting live here from the UNN studios, and we've got a very special guest tonight. We've got Dr. David Cartland. Dr. David, how are you tonight?
Special, I like that word. I've never been called special before. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on, David. It's always a pleasure to join UNN.
Good. So we haven't spoken before. Obviously, I know who you are because of during the COVID scam, you were quite outspoken. And then obviously things appear to have escalated significantly recently. So David, let's just go back to the very, very beginning then. When did you graduate from medical school and when did you start practicing?
I wish I didn't take that sip of water. Sorry about that. Right, yeah, so I didn't get into medicine the first time. It was always a plan to do something around medicine, didn't know what exactly that looked like, but from the age of 5 in the nursery with the stethoscope, it was always on the cards. Long story short, I did a biomedical science degree because even after A-levels, I wasn't really that sure if I wanted medicine or something else, science related. So I did a biomedical science degree, which was heavily weighted in immunology and virology and lots of kind of science-based subjects, 30 of them, and I aced it. I got first-class honours. Tried to get into medical school the next year into one of these prestigious graduate courses for doctors, and ended up. They told me to go back to school, even though I'd got 30 A's out of 30 exams. I had to go back to school to do a chemistry A level. This is the in-the-box thinking of admissions tutors at medical school. So I went back to school. It didn't go well because I'd just done 3 years as an undergraduate. Did a master's in between in angiogenesis, became a published scientist through that, and then subsequently did a 4-year shortened version of the medical degree and aced that too. It had quite a high dropout rate of people. It was that stressful. So I got through that and became a doctor. Then you serve your apprenticeship and you do your junior years, FY1, FY2 in the Midlands. And then at that point you have to decide what's next, what's my plan. And I chose general practice. I was kind of between that and A&E, and so I kept my A&E in the background. So I was kind of dual training at the same time, officially in GP, but also doing regular staff grade shifts in the A&E. And became a GP in the Midlands, enjoyed it, graduated in 2014, and became a member of the Royal College of GPs, started practicing in the Midlands.
So can I ask what age are you, David? Can I ask you what age you are?
Can I ask you to guess? No, I'm joking. I'm 43 now, so I've crammed a lot in.
So you would have been 33 then when you qualified as a doctor?
Yeah, I'll let you do the maths, but yeah, probably. Well, I've been a doctor now. I think it would have been my 17th year as a doctor from 2008. So.
No, all right. So 2008, right? So that's not right. So 2008. So right, okay, that's about right. So about 26, 27, right? So you were a GP during your time then as a GP. Were you ever political? Were you ever involved? Did you ever question what you were doing at all?
Political, no. I've never really been a political person, really. I used to actually watch the BBC, I'm ashamed to say, and believe the mainstream media and trust the government even, trust Big Pharma even. But yeah, I mean, my main issue really was, and I did a talk in Guernsey the other day saying that the main reason that the principle I practiced through was primum non nocere, which is when you stand up at graduation, you take an oath in your practice to do no harm. And so I followed that through in all of my career. So my CV is about 3 pages, and I admit this because I used to go into a surgery and you'd see things that just weren't safe or inefficient, and that's kind of where I got political and say, look, 10-minute appointments, that's just ridiculous, or making doctors see 48 patients a day just isn't good for anyone, the patient or the doctor. So I'd raise these points and they'd move you on, all in the background telling you that you need to be able to whistleblow freely. It's encouraged until you do. And so that's the kind of only political sort of thing I went into, really. I was quite a private GP, really. You were in your room all day for starters.
Okay. So then March 2020 hits. What's your initial reaction with everything that's going on?
As I say, I was watching the BBC, and so I was watching that footage. And when you look back at it, it was frankly insane. At the time, there's a new pandemic, the yellow and blacks going across the screen, the fear messages, watching people drop down. I mean, you look in retrospect and think, how did I even, for a respiratory virus, it's just insane. People don't drop in the street like that, and bizarre stuff. But yeah, we're scared. I was working in Kidderminster at the time at a massive practice, So this had the potential to be something big. And with my A&E background, I thought this is going to hit the fan. We were expecting a zombie apocalypse, weren't we? And it just didn't happen. That's the headline. I was sat in this massive practice. I was given a pass to work from home because I had asthma as a kid. They said anyone with asthma or respiratory stay at home. I had to sign a waiver to say if I die of COVID, on my head be it. You can't sue Kidderminster Health Centre. And I walked in and I saw the rest of the doctors running the other way, finding excuses to not be there. And it was me and another guy that kind of ran the pandemic planning with the management, of course. And it just never started. It just didn't start. That's the headline. We were sat around doing nothing, frankly, and chatting to COVID patients, alleged COVID patients, and being given these primitive ways of assessing people over the telephone. Getting them to count backwards from 30 to guess what their oxygen saturations were, and if they were guesstimated to be less than 90% into hospital, never to be seen again. And this was the age of the TikTok dancing. People were so bored that they were choreographing these ridiculous dancing routines. And very, very quiet. And, this is a big practice. And we were about a quarter to a half capacity. I used to have a lunch break, which was noticeable for starters. And I had plenty of time to get around. I was doing a bit of a political push. My first venture into politics was just simply going around the hospitals with a local politician trying to get in. And we were getting food donations and fast food donations to take to the heroes, only to be met with empty hospitals and empty ITUs, and specifically going to the COVID wards. I could have been anyone, actually. I know I did work at one of the hospitals, but I just walked in with the stack of pizzas. And to say that the COVID wards were empty, and the original thing was that the people in the COVID wards weren't in there for COVID. So even that, there were people with orthopedic issues at swab on entry, they were on the COVID ward. To have like 5-to-1 nursing, one patient to 5 nurses, surrounded by my pizza. This is what was going on. So it was a very insane moment. And then you go back, switch on the TV and see what was, the hazmat suits and the rest of the propaganda. That's what you can do with. And that's when it really started for me. And then I moved to Cornwall then in the end. It was a family decision.
So you moved to Cornwall, and when did you really start to question everything? So obviously you see it firsthand. You were told there's this huge pandemic. The hospitals are empty. There's nothing like what is being done on the television. When did it really kind of start clicking for you that nothing was correct on it?
Well, you've got to remember, both in the Midlands and in Cornwall, one of my jobs was, alongside a nurse practitioner, ringing up these so-called COVID patients. So asking them what their symptoms were, and you got kind of various incarnations of man flu, as I called it, headaches, achy bones, stuff that you would probably be putting the phone down if you were a doctor. Go to the chemist and seek some home remedies, essentially. But down in Cornwall, the quietness continued. And I remember when we got the tests come in, and the doctors were all in agreement that these little lateral flow, the ones that look like pregnancy tests, I think the phrase they used were they're not worth the plastic they're made from. And we went from that to kind of like suddenly this frantic testing. You walk into the building, they're holding this thing up to your head to check your temperature. If it's high, if it's low, you walk in anyway. And it's like, well, what's the point of this? And then you have to test every day with these silly tests, and positive, you're off for 2 weeks. So the workforce was about, not the workforce, the work, the amount of work we had to do was similar to the Midlands. It was a very small practice I worked at originally, bored out of our brains. We were not seeing any of the routine stuff.
It's interesting. Yeah.
People were obviously stepping back. And if you've got, for example, rectal bleeding, you wouldn't want to bother the doctor because they're dealing with this absolute carnage. And it wasn't carnage. It was chilled out, the most relaxed time of my life. I had plenty of time to do my CPD and audits and all the rest of it. And that's kind of when it started for me, because I had a really quiet Friday afternoon on call, which just doesn't happen in your career. And I did an audit and found basically the headline of it was that the people who were getting positive COVID tests were the double vaccinated at the time, and the single vaccinated, a couple or three maybe, and none of the unvaccinated had COVID. And at that time, that's when I started to see a few of the vaccine injuries coming in. And that was my eureka moment. It was the people coming in to me in a very small patient population and saying, Doc, and it wasn't really much after the first, I'll be honest. Second, there was a trickle, a few odd reactions and not right. And it was that third one when it really did kick off, that booster. and things went exponential. And that was not my opinion. That was people coming in saying, you know, I've not been right. That was the main one. I've just not been right since that bloody jab I had. And everything in between, from, you know, swollen joints and reactive arthritis to, you know, huge lymphadenopathy under the armpits of the arm that they were injected on, bedridden for days, and strokes in young people started to come through, myocarditis in young people started to come through. And that was the alarm for me. So that's when really, in earnest, my research started, because up until then I was spoon-fed by the government, and I was, you know, I trusted my bosses. My boss just trusted NHS England. NHS England trusted the government, and so forth, up to Big Pharma, who at the time were taking everything they could do to get indemnity from prosecution. I was treating the COVID patients as I would a normal viral illness. You know, I'd give them a steroid if they were wheezy, for example. And so that's where the problem came, that I was treating COVID, and you can't treat COVID because that damages the indemnity from prosecution. You're not allowed a drug that's new or repurposed, and that's where I won't say it, the proverbial hit the fan, because I started to say, you know.
So for the start of it was quiet, it was empty, but then, as you say, once the vaccines came in, that's when you actually started seeing that's when you actually started to see the real harms come in. And who did you start speaking to about these vaccine harms, David? How did you approach your colleagues? Did you approach people? What was there any conversations going on?
Brilliant, yeah, great question. I tried everything in-house. You know, I'm doing these surgeries. I used to, in Cornwall, I agreed to 24 patients a day. Of those 24 patients, I would see probably between 2 and 4 patients that were query related. And now, bearing in mind, I wasn't looking for this. This was patients coming in with odd constellations of symptoms that, you know, being a doctor is about pattern recognition. And if you've got X, Y, and Z symptom, you've got A disease, or if you've got ABC symptoms, you've got B disease. But these people were coming in with constellations of stuff that didn't fit together. And so, you know, I keep getting told correlation doesn't equal causation, but if somebody's had a jab yesterday and suddenly they're swollen up like the Michelin man, then there's a high likelihood with the Bradford Hill criteria that it was, you know. So anyway, going back to what did I do about it, getting all these alarm bells, knocking doors on my doctors. What are you seeing? Oh, no, we're not seeing what you're seeing. Are you sure you're not pinning everything on vaccine injury? That started really early. People just flat denying, no, not the vaccine. But the same people denying were the same people administering. And I'll say this for sure, just for clarity, I never administered a single vaccine for COVID-19, ever. Never have, never will.
How much were GPs being paid at the time per vaccine?
I think the first one was a bonus, that because, you know, when they arrived, they came with like this liquid nitrogen, you know, it had to be uber for 15 quid. I think it was a something per jab. And then there was uproar because they dropped the second one down to about 12 quid. So not much when you think about it being blood money. And I think it sort of hovered around £10 per jab.
But what, 20, 30 a day, 300-400 quid on top of your existing money? I mean,
they were having, the way it works in our surgery is they did it down at what I called the jabatoire. So they basically had this big complex building with 3 surgeries in, shut down to all clinical activities. Maybe there was this one poor guy, usually me, doing all the emergencies and actual clinical stuff, while everyone else descended into madness with masks and visors, and it became military sheep herding, essentially. On the floor, you're seeing batches of people coming at 15-minute intervals. They were issued a stopwatch. They were given their, you know, it's a circuit, and you go through the circuit in the figure of 8 and come out with your stopwatch. And I was, you know, I was listening in, and, you know, they're not giving any information. When they checked in, it was just name, are you well? Even if you said no, they still did it anyway. Are you pregnant was another 3 of the 4 questions. And even if you said you were, you're still going to get it. So it's just very bizarre. And I was watching this from, like I say, I was absolutely getting battered, you know, covering the surgeries, you know, actually sick patients while this was going on in the background. But going back to what did I do? I knocked on the practice manager's door. I started subtle things like leaving papers in the coffee room, you know, dropping conversations in, particularly when they were going for the younger cohorts. For example, I used to drop in the papers that showed myocarditis warning signals in big studies, big prospective studies in Korea, for example. And I remember one particular conversation where I was surrounded by the whole clinical staff. I walked in, and you can see them sort of roll their eyes because I'd started to be quite vocal. And I was showing them this paper from the Journal of American Medical Association, a prestigious journal. And one of the physios stood up and said, "I don't want to listen to your bleeping conspiracy theories." And I'm just holding this paper up saying, and then half the room left, and those left behind agreed with me.
Yeah, it was, again, when you look back on it, and it's the same with everything, though. People just, they basically have been brainwashed by the television. And if anything, even the slightest thing against their worldview is presented to them, they go mental. Like their brain stops functioning. I don't know whether they've been MK. Well, I think it's a form of like MK Ultra, if not itself, where it's a conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat, and these people always repeat the same things. They're not even interested. Oh, you've been watching YouTube videos as one as well. I mean, they maybe don't say it in a jock accent, but that's what they say. But so when did it really start going kind of wrong for you then, David, in terms of your ability to practice medicine? When did they really start coming after you then?
I think I got gradually more vocal because I was sort of screaming into the abyss. As I mentioned, I tried in-house. I then tried higher up the chain to present. I mean, I've still got a slide deck unpresented from some of the early investigations I've done. No one would listen to even professional, lunchtime grand rounds, as it were. I think for me, it came when the injuries turned to deaths. And my eureka moment really was a week when we had 2 deaths in 1 week of 2 women in their 40s. And these were coroner-confirmed AstraZeneca deaths. There was no confusion. The papers I read myself, these 2 women died with vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia. In the other surgery I worked at, on the same day as the second death certificate, I got a call from the local neurosurgical centre and said, this guy's collapsed, he's got a cerebral venous thrombosis, and he had the Zeneca the day before. And the neurosurgeon said, when I asked him, do you think it could be? Oh, you're not one of those anti-vaxxers, are you? And that's the first time I got called.
That's what the answer. Oh, yeah, that's another one. That's exactly. It brings back all the memories. Oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. You're an anti-vaxxer.
I knew that weekend there was going to be a big jab push, and all the 2 deaths for AstraZeneca as well. So I begged my boss and said, look, there's something going on with these Zenecas. I don't know what it is, but they're clots by the looks of it. And I picked that up really early because obviously cerebral venous thrombosis clot, death by 1,000 clots, these 2 women. Told my boss and he just said, what do you want me to do about it? The show must go on. I remember the phrase he used. And they jabbed about 500 poor sods from Penzance that weekend, including the Zeneca. You just pull it at that point. But they carried on regardless. And anyway, this continued. And so it first came to my attention then that there were doctors on the television. That's when it really hit the fan, because the TV doctors were saying 100% safe, 100% safe long term. They were saying safe in pregnancy. They were saying clots were just background. They were just saying, safe and effective repeatedly, and the same people saying the same message. And I started doing what I call the Rogues Gallery, and featuring people like Van Tam and Chris Whitty and all the people that were making these claims, and just quoting them. Just about that time, the complaints started rolling in. And bearing in mind at this point, I've got an exemplary clinical and academic record, no patient complaints. Yes, I've been around in terms of surgeries because of the reasons we mentioned at the start, sort of raising concerns, aka a troublemaker. And so, yeah, the complaints started coming in from the GMC, and very early on they mounted up. And bearing in mind, you have to respond to every complaint. The tally at the end, before the GMC tribunal started in earnest, was 256, if I remember correctly, of which they only found 5 to stick. So if you throw enough mud, a little bit sticks. And eventually, we'll come to that, I'm sure, later on. But, the other 251 were thrown out. And most of those complaints were from doctors or anonymous trolls, as I know you're well acquainted with a similar set of trolls that I am on UNN. And yeah, just frivolous. Dr. Cartland spreading misinformation, baseless, citationless stuff. Dr. Cartland's affecting public confidence in the profession with his demeanour on Twitter. At the time I was being banned from all the social medias for, I got banned for an interview. I hold up the FISA documents and read them out, and put the references. Actually read from the paper as I did the interview. It was breaching community guidelines on misinformation. So yeah,
I'm going to read this out from your tribunal. Tribunal Chair Claire Linley said the panel accepted there is evidence that Dr. Cartland is a good doctor and well regarded by patients, but concluded his online conduct was an example of serious professional misconduct. Dr. Cartland's actions online impact others, undermine public confidence, and could damage the reputation of the profession. I mean, it is all very spurious. So, David, you've have you been able to work then since July 25?
Well, it started before that. So when these complaints started coming in, it was 22. I remember January 22. The GMC, the kind souls that they are, in somewhere in their policy, they ask you where you work. They say you need to do a work details form, and if you don't do it, they'll prosecute you for that. So I had to give them the 6 names of the practices I've been doing regular locums at. And anyway, they write them this letter. I saw one copy of the letter, and it said basically, "Are you aware that your locum doctor, David Cartland, has been accused of bullying, harassment, and incitement online, and falsifying medical documents?" And we'll probably come to that later on. But that was the charge. And imagine as a practice manager reading that about your locum. And at the bottom, it was, "Have you got any concerns about Dr. Cartland that you'd like to share with us?" So actively fishing at that point. That was the end of my career, really. In Cornwall, I won't swear, it spreads quickly.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
It's like a big village sort of atmosphere, and the reputational damage spread. Bearing in mind it's accusations and nothing had been heard from my side at that point. The GMC hearing started, and I mean, like I said, I did a job just before the GMC hearing started, and I was kind of running a practice. And some matter of weeks later, you're a danger to patients, as you said. Bringing the profession into disrepute was used, negatively affecting confidence in the profession. But yeah, it really did affect I mean, I've not really been able to work properly. I mean, I did 6 weeks about, I think it was October time. Before that, it'd been months and months since I've been a doctor. Bearing in mind, I'm an A&E trained GP. I've got minor ops skills. I've got ability to teach students. We've got a chronic shortage of doctors. Locums were locum agencies were calling me saying, "We put your name forward for this surgery that we're in desperate need for a doctor." As soon as I said your name, in fact, I've seen the email, "We would rather have no doctor than have Dr. David Cartland work for us." Now, that was one of my complaints. There were 5 in all, 3 doctors that I'd allegedly harassed, one about giving COVID vaccine support letters for travelling in really urgent circumstances. And finally, a local practice manager emailed me in response to an application at a really desperate surgery. I've got a pristine CV, and I don't know what's happened. You've gone. You still there? Hello?
David, you still there? Sorry, David. I don't know what happened there. I think the internet went
Don't worry.
suspiciously dawn. Sorry about that, Dr. David. Honestly,
Well,
that's very annoying.
I'll be
Everyone's
honest,
enjoying that.
I'll
Thanks
be
for
honest.
staying.
Go on, sorry, there's a bit of a lag.
Thanks for staying on. So, David, again, sorry, I missed everything that you probably said. Everyone's still there watching. I don't know what happened there. It's the internet just conked out. So, talk to me about the people who have been coming after you. There's been quite a lot of accounts and trolls. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so in fact, one of my victims was one of the organisers of the trolls. So without naming names, you're aware, I'm aware, there's a group of people on Twitter that I initially regarded as just internet trolls, just people who sit there with the keyboard writing things. Then it became more sinister because it became more coordinated, more targeted. And, it went from the internet quite quickly and just abusing like the same stuff that you get in real life, ad hominem attacks, you're wrong, making abusive comments about you. And bearing in mind, like I say, one of the ringleaders who ran this, I'm going to call them the mutton crew. You probably heard that phrase. Mm-hmm. And the person who runs that is a mutton farmer. That's hence the name. He was one of my victims. And long and short of it is that he's no victim. In fact, he's actually about to be booted out of the Irish Medical Council for being, I won't jump the gun, but so anyway, these internet attacks that you get from the trolls, and it got quite personal in terms of the ad hominem attacks, and then it moved out into various areas of my life. So I'm I was a football referee. They contact the Football Association, tagging them in constantly, making accusations, emailing them. It went over into emails to my personal email, abusive stuff, police reports, contacting surgeries, cold calling surgeries, and I know that because I was working at a surgery in October time, and they received a call from two of them, openly goading and gloating that they had managed to get me sacked, saving me the petrol money, as they called it, and they really did believe they were doing a service. It got really sinister, and with each passing day now, it's getting more sinister because they're stepping it up. So it's not just internet trolls on Twitter. When I say they, who knows who they are, who's running them? We speculate that it's kind of 77th Brigade, but there's a lot of other NGOs that are being implicated, such as CCDH, CTI League, Reality Team. You've got Project Halo. They were openly, again, one of my other victims was openly associated with Project Halo. This is all that I've learned throughout. So this is an organised, multi-organisation, multifaceted trolling of anyone that spoke out against the COVID narrative. And they try and do anything they can to ruin all aspects of your life, in summary.
So David, you're married, you've got 4 kids. How are you able to now provide for your family?
Great question. I can't. In summary, literally, I used to have a 10 grand a month job. That was taken off me with the strike off, having been found guilty. Complete kangaroo court. We can talk about that if you want or not. But you've lost a 10 grand salary suddenly. 3 years before I had a decision made against me. I make a little bit of money from social media now. My main earnings were Football Association refereeing. I've got a health coaching job. Put it this way, I earn about 10% of what I used to earn, 10 to 15%. We get by. We've had to change things, but my wife is an absolute warrior. She keeps us going, really, and it's difficult. We've got 5 dogs as well as 4 kids. So.
Are you able to practice as a doctor I'm not telling you to do this, but would you still be able to go and practice abroad, or is that you finished now as a doctor? Could you go to Dubai and be a doctor?
I guess so. Yeah. We just moved down here and we got settled. The kids are settled. It'd be a shame, and it would. Firstly, I don't want to be hounded out of my. The place that I love. I love this place. It's a beautiful spiritual place. I love being around the coast. But I've got a lovely house that we've settled in. Perfect for the dogs even. They've got their own places within the house. And we shouldn't have to, but yeah, you're right, Dubai, possibly. I haven't looked into that. I know there's movement in America. We've had one of the doctors in Canada that's been absolutely battered by the same trolls. We've all got the same trolls in common. He's just got his Florida license, William Mackis. And so there seems to be a little bit of political asylum with the Trump administration. That means that there are options, and even today we've talked about Florida as an option, as a viable option, whether that's me alone, just for a period, or whether that's all of us going. But I don't like being bullied, and that's the irony of all of this. I used to be the kid that was bullied. I hate harassment. I hate bullying, and to be struck off for internet stuff. And we were talking earlier off camera, weren't we, about some of the doctors and proportionality, about, you know, doctors are raping patients, doctors are nipping out of theatre when they've got patients under and having intercourse and popping back in while the patient's asleep, let off. Patients being castrated by doctors inappropriately, being let off. You know, and short suspensions for sexual harassment. And I've written some letters exempting patients from, well, I wouldn't say exempting even, I'd say providing support for their position as a doctor, bodily autonomy, freedom to refuse with full capacity, and for my own belief that these jabs are damn harmful. And I've got absolute thousands of papers and citations that back my position. I've got hundreds of doctors that back me in my position. And there's actually a principle that does support me in that, called the Boland principle. If there's a significant body of doctors that have my view, then it's okay to have that view. It's even okay to have it as an individual. You know, there's been cavalier doctors in the past that have, you know, called things out and been called crazy.
How many other doctors were struck off? Sam White, Anne McCloskey, I can think of. Were there any other doctors struck off over this?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. There were about 10 or 15, I guess, across, well, if you add Ireland into the mix, the Republic, you know, it's going up to 2030. And I've watched in the background, you know, my whole hearing was over 3 years. So the things I was struck off for were 2021 and 2022, struck off in 25 for such offences. And I was watching as Sam got stitched up, Dr. Mohammed Adil was stitched up, all for questioning, really. Anne McCloskey the same. I was watching even my good friend, who's a psychiatrist, who was struck off the week before me. And the BMJ's headline was, and he won't mind me saying this, Dr. Daniel Armstrong struck off for questioning the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine. A week later in my tribunal, they're telling me, we're not here for COVID-related matters, we're here about Twitter spats, and you can think whatever you want about COVID. You've got freedom to even be against the narrative. So which one is it? I've even got an email from the GMC saying, we don't get involved in harassment or social media, yet here we are. You know,
so
which one is it?
What about people who would say, like, you've just done this to, like, I mean, as a grift to gain celebrity and everything like that? Because that tends to be the standard response. How would you respond to that?
Well, when you look at the definition of the words that they call you, so a grifter is, I think, if I remember, a petty swindler is the actual dictionary definition. So I don't know what of this makes me a petty swindler. But, you know, I just mentioned the salary side of it. If you Google me, I'm absolutely transparent. Say anyone who wants to know what the media can do to you if you lose your job in circumstances, Google me. You'll read about this vile, dishonest, unethical, bullying, harassing, evil, even homophobic, apparently, even though I'm not homophobic. I've got a position on the trans agenda. Despite that, the GMC find me guilty of hostility to the LGBTQ plus community. I'm not. I've got no hostility other than men dancing around children. That's it. That's a safeguarding concern, by the way. Crazy times.
I mean, but can you understand, though, and look, I'm just asking this from a devil's advocate perspective, that the GMC have a duty to maintain confidence in the system. You know, how can they have people like you questioning the system? You know, can you kind of understand what they're doing, like, or how do you feel they should have handled it? What could they have done, in your opinion?
Well, the problem is the people that are making the rules are the people who believe the COVID vaccine is safe and effective, and they're never going to see otherwise. So they'll see me as a rebel, and by definition, I'm negatively affecting public confidence in the profession. I'm bringing it into disrepute. And actually, I spin that back round, and a lot of my defence was reminding the GMC of things, their own principles, such as good medical practice and the guidelines associated therein. Secondly, the duty of candour. So if mistakes happen, particularly when there's a novel drug that's going badly wrong very quickly, you've got a duty for that same reason, keeping the profession's confidence up. And then things like informed consent. I'm saying, look, you know, we're breaching our own guidance here on informed consent. You know, have a read. I'm telling the GMC to have a review, a revision session on it. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, first thing they did was they didn't listen to both sides. If you commit murder, you get a prosecution and you get a defence. And so I can't even say that they were fair because they didn't listen to any of my defence. And I'm not exaggerating. You can see it in the MPTS determination. It's available on Google. If you can find anything that came from me, you're doing well. You know, if I say Dr. Cartland said this to a doctor, well, why did he say it? What were the reasons? They were using isolated screenshots. You know, you need to know what happened just before that screenshot to be able to make a judgment, you know, without using examples. So I don't know. I mean, look, you've got to remember the GMC are a neutral charity to maintain, as you said, professional confidence for the public. Yet here they are investing in AstraZeneca and Merck and PepsiCo and Nestle and loads of other. I didn't agree to put my subs to that, you know, and I don't know that. So it's from the top down. You're not getting a neutral charity. You know, there's loads of conflicts of interest within the complainants, for example. So again, I can't talk about certain parts of the case, but yeah, these people were involved intimately with pharmaceutical industry. I wasn't. I was just an independent GP. I don't know what I'd just say to them. Be fair. Just be, you know, in a murder trial, you've got to listen to the witnesses. First thing they did, one of the first rulings was said, Dr. Cartland, you're not allowed any of your witness statements to be read. They are inadmissible and irrelevant. So that straight off the bat is in breach of the Human Rights Act of a fair trial. At least even if you think it's crap, then hear it out first and then say it's crap. But they weren't listening. And then they said even my own witness bundle, which was about that thick, they said most of it's nonsense, to paraphrase. You can only use about 10 or 15% of it. So I don't know, it's just corrupt. And I'll say that straight, it was corrupt. And they didn't just bring in any old barrister, they brought in the top barrister in the country. And they brought in ironically, a homicide and terrorist barrister to be the GMC counsel. Sweet.
Do you have any regrets doing what you've done?
For a quieter life, yes. For a happier life, yeah. For a better financial life, yeah. But no, I mean, we're talking about, I always say about my grandchildren, I've got 4 kids, I'm likely to have grandchildren if I don't get bumped off. The fact of the matter is I need to look them in the eyes and say, I did this for you. Because, this is coming out now. I mean, I've just been in Guernsey for a conference, and the people in the room, all of them stood up when we asked who was vaccine injured. I agree, that's a biased audience. But they had stories to tell that were just tragic. And the other side of that conference were people who were eminent doctors presenting their data. It wasn't conspiratorial.
No, I mean, I said this clearly. Any medicine or drug rollout to the population, it just from a pure statistical perspective, you're going to have injuries. And you had doctors going on the TV saying this is 100% safe. And as I always say, if you even look at a paracetamol or a Nurofen or anything, they point out this is not 100% safe.
Well, you saw it.
So they were lying off the bat about that. And again, there is a debate to be had about the degrees of how dangerous the vaccine was, how many people were killed or how many people were injured. But they deliberately lied to people that it was 100% safe and it stopped the spread. I mean, they were breaking their Hippocratic oath. They were breaking all sorts of ethics. They were just lying. And again, even if some of the theories about how deep it was seem outlandish, they were still lying on those core things.
Yeah, flagrant lying, as you say. So, for example, to say one of my victims went up very public and said, if you have a COVID-19 vaccine in pregnancy, it's 100% safe long term. Mm-hmm. A, long term's not happen. B, pregnant women were excluded from the trials. So where's your data? So I wrote an email to this doctor quite politely saying, where's your data? I'd like to see it in case I missed it. If not, I'll report you to the GMC for misinformation. Sweet irony. That was in the documented MPTS tribunal determination that Dr. Cartland threatened retaliatory action to a female colleague. I asked her for a data, and they kind of forgot the fact that this woman had contacted my business partner with a load of libelous comments. She started things off. That was everything they did. It was ignored. I can't tell you enough, but all I see my position as calling out liars, bullies, and misinformers. Mm-hmm. That's all I've done. And if they want to call that harassment, they can call it harassment. But I can look my grandkids in the eye and say I stood up and. This is coming out. There's no way of stopping this avalanche. It's about to go.
And now the latest one, David, talked to us about that, about the DBS checks and playing football and being a referee. What have they done there?
So I'm running on fumes anyway, financially, without going any further into that. And I like the only thing that's kept me sane in all of this. I had to retire from football with a bad injury, and my legs just went in the end. So I thought this would be a good time to be a ref. So I thought about it for a while, became a referee. I've been smashing matches. I've been promoted in quick time. Enjoy every minute of doing every match from veterans, women's league, youth football, open age. And I love to coach the young lads in particular, just coaching them through the game. That's sort of wonderful. Anyway, that was going really, really well. And then suddenly the FA started getting reports that I'm this, that, and the other. That's number one thing. But the second part you mentioned about the DBS, didn't you? So subsequent to somebody being struck off for misconduct, the GMC by default have to refer on to the DBS. And the DBS, for any viewers that don't know, is the kind of reformed criminal records check. So if you employ somebody, you do a screening tool that says, is Dr. Cartland a criminal? That's mainly what it's for. And it flags up with the conviction being the key. There is a small amount of wiggle room for that, where you can be put on the DBS list for harm. It has to be harm. And the second part of that is that it has to be harm to a vulnerable adult or a child. That's what the barred list is for, banning somebody from working with vulnerable adults and children. I've been put on that list. No crime, no harm, no abuse, no child, no vulnerable adult. It's related to social media, spats. And I'll say spats, they gave as good as they got. And writing, they sort of focused on these 5 exemptions that I did. Exemptions where they had no copy of the letter. They called it falsifying medical notes. I didn't touch anyone's medical notes. They didn't even have the date, so they couldn't tell me the rules that I'd broken, but still found me guilty. This is how bonkers it went. But yeah, DBS, done and dusted, found that out a week ago. The video where I'm talking about it's gone viral, and only today I found out that I'm now actually banned from this evening, half an hour before we came on air. I'm suspended, interim suspension for all football related activity. I can't even stand next to a football match and watch my son play football. I can't ref, I can't coach. I was due to dust my boots off tomorrow and play for a team in a leisurely, kind of chilled out, blokes who don't normally play Sunday league football convene on a Wednesday down here. I'm banned from that. So I just can't see where this ends, what the end game is, who's perpetrating this. The FA know I'm a good guy. I've been promoted. I've got brilliant feedback. Banned from reffing. I'm banned from pretty much everything, David, because what can you do? If you're on a list whereby you can't work with vulnerable adults and children, what can you do, really? It's even to work in the toilets, you have to DBS check by the organisation.
But I mean, this is the process is the punishment, isn't it? And then when you're labelled in the mainstream media as this extremist, I mean, I've experienced it, not to the level that you have, because clearly I do what I do, whereas you were a professional, you had that. And but this is what they do, and they use the media because whether we like it or not, the average normie still reads the mainstream media. They still read the Daily Mail, they read the BBC, and they trust it. So they will be influenced by that, and they know it works, and that's why they use these places to attack people. And and then the one they'll start doing as well, maybe there's more to it. Where there's smoke, there's fire. It is very insidious the way they behave.
I do often wonder, every night actually, I'm tossing and turning in bed, why me? Why this? I have got extreme views, really extreme views, and the extreme views are primum non nocere, first do no harm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, patient safety, evidence-based practice. I kind of stayed in my lane, really, ethics as well, to add to that. I stayed in my lane. I picked 6 areas, and the areas were pretty much the ethics of informed consent and coercion. If you coerce anyone to do anything, read it in the Nuremberg Code. If you coerce anyone to do anything, you invalidate informed consent, aside from the fact you've given no information about the stuff. I talked about lockdowns, I talked about masks and their pointlessness and damage, collateral damage. I talked about children and pregnant women, 2 of the most protected patient cohorts, and said, why are we doing this to them? Where's your data? JCVI is saying on one hand, we shouldn't be doing it to kids. The government overrule it. Pregnancy, there was no testing pre-rollout, yet they gave it. And then finally, I committed anathema, which was I stood by the vaccine injured and said, these people are real, they exist. Stop gaslighting them. Stop telling them they don't exist. Stop telling them we can't find a cause for your symptoms. We're baffled, absolutely baffled by this, but we know for one thing, it's not the vaccine. Absolutely not. And telling them, I saw somebody last week that they've been referred to psychiatry. They've had 5 jabs and nothing's gone wrong. They've had the 6th. And both in the couple have gone downhill fast, almost simultaneously. and they've both been referred to psychiatry rather than having a proper medical workup with a whole cacophony of symptoms, really scary, debilitating symptoms. I'm being told patients have had a stroke after the jab, one day after. It's because of long COVID. This is where we are. I'm having coroners when I'm working in environments where I'm observing for families post-mortems. The coroner says, oh yeah, barn door, vaccine death, this is, I've never seen anything more classic. And then they go to the inquest and record natural causes. Having said it,
yeah, I mean, as you say, it's so insidious that they've denied the real reasons why these people have died and the injuries that they've been caused. And again, I mean, they removed the indemnity of the pharmaceutical companies. What was it, the limit of compensation? What did they cap it at?
What's it now? 100 and something, 120.
120, that's right. I mean, that was the real red flag for me at the time. They capped the limit, they capped the injury at 120, and they removed the indemnity from the vaccine. Never done that before in history. Incredible, and yet everyone queued up.
Not only was it a measly sum, David, but the fact that I've been involved again back in the day when I was registered to help these people that were having trouble with the vaccine damage payment scheme. And I'll give you one example. They do everything they can to not pay out. Believe me, they go right back to the 1940s, honestly, in some patients. And one patient had Guillain-Barré syndrome. In fact, ironically.
That's right, yeah, that was a big thing, yeah, that's right. I remember
well, he's a postman, and he happened to collapse outside a hospital with Guillain-Barré syndrome. He had an ascending paralysis of his legs. 3 weeks later, he's not had an MRI, he's had no treatment. He had the jab very recently. We applied for vaccine damage payment scheme, and the response he got originally, and we had to kick and scream, he eventually got it. But he had to kick and scream. But the original thing was you have to be 60% disabled, and you've only lost your 2 legs. You've got a couple of arms, and you can use a wheelchair. You're not disabled enough. I mean, can you imagine that? You've took the jab, you've lost the use of your legs and your job, and you're being told by these scumbags that you're not disabled enough. There's other worse examples that just came to my head, but I don't know how these people sleep at night. The doctors, the people leading these people high and dry, these people.
Well, quite easily, David. I remember speaking during the COVID rallies, and I said, when you've got a Range Rover in the front drive, you've got a 300, 400 grand, maybe 500 grand mortgage, you've got 3 or 4 kids at a private school. That's, you don't need to put people in gulags. They're already in a gulag where they know if they lose their job, like, that's it. Like, as you say, when GPs, people in these places, they're earning high 6-figure sums. It's very easy to just keep them from saying anything because the punishment is far greater than putting them in a gulag. It's the social shame, it's the stigma, it's the the losing of a lifestyle. And the reality is 99.9% of people will just go along with it and just say, well, I'm doing what I'm doing for my family.
You're right, financial captivity. So people, when you've got a certain salary coming in, you take on a certain lifestyle, private schools, big hire purchase agreements, big mortgages. So, if you believe me, I'll get enough doctors tapping me on the shoulder. Well done, Dave. Really keep going. Really does my head in, really does. Now, what used to be, Doc, I asked them very straight, well, where are you on the front line here? And the answer used to be what you just said, hire purchase agreements, pensions and all the rest of it. It's changed very quickly, actually. In the last couple of years, it's been, well, they've seen what they've done to you, Dr. Cartland. So what used to be called being Wakefielded is now being called being Cartlanded or being Sam Whited, and everyone's petrified. The amount of messages I get daned out across the board, paramedics, nurses, doctors, wow, keep up the good work, Dave. We can't speak out because we see. I know that's
right. But that's just the story of true as life. You march all the way to the top of the hill and think they're going to be there with you, and then you look round and they've all buggered off back down to the bottom. That's just the way it is, and that's a very good phrase. Financial captivity. That's what it is.
It looked quite promising because we had that 100,000 NHS staff about the mandate, didn't we? We had this army. We had them throwing their tunics down. We had them throwing their scrubs and stethoscopes. It was very emotional to see.
But it was only when it affected them, though. Again, this is the thing I've noticed. People got very vocal when it was really. It was the same as all the anti-lockdown marches. The reality is, the vast majority of people, once it stopped affecting them, they just buggered off back to their own lives. And sadly, people are just very selfish now, and they're very narcissistic.
We're in that generation. I call it the me, myself, and I generation. Like you say, I mean, I used to go to those protests in thousands, and very quickly, like you say, lockdowns finish. It's almost like protest fatigue. It's very much that if it doesn't affect my direct bubble, my life, my enjoyment, then what's the point? And I don't know. I don't know. I wish I shut my mouth, but it's not in me. I'm inherently looking at patient safety. It's kind of riddled my career with trouble, really, sticking my head above the parapet and saying, this isn't right. And then you soon become a troublemaker.
Yeah. No, listen, it's really not pleasant, David. It's horrific. And these fuckers know what they're doing. They know how to target people, they know how to pinpoint you, and they know how to destroy you. And it's just horrible to see it happen. And as you say, if more people had shown some balls, if more people had actually stood up, then it wouldn't happen. But yeah, some people are saying that. I mean, again, who am I to give advice? But if I was to give advice, it would be like, do what you need to do for your family. And if it means going to Florida, if it means going to Dubai or somewhere like that to earn for your family, then you do what you need to do. And I think 99.999% of people will understand that and realize that, because at the end of the day, David, the problem is it's, again, this is a big now, but it's not what COVID isn't even what it was 2-3 years ago. I'm not saying people are going to forget about you, but people are very, very fickle, and that is a problem, and they move from things. But you have to do what's right for you and your family.
Yeah, I'll always be there for those people, and I get that a lot now from people who are on the other side of the debate saying, "Oh, it's so 2021, move on." You can't move on if you've lost your spouse. You can't move on if you've lost your leg or the use of them. I see whereby the NHS staff just push them in the far corner in the dark and don't acknowledge them, let alone help them. These guys come to me, and one of the main things I do is listen. Listen to them, validate them, hear their pain. Try and signpost them, and say that you're not psychiatrically unwell, because that's absolutely sickening. So I'll never leave them. I'll never abandon them. The same as I would never abandon my children. I see the tragedies day in, day out, and they are tragedies. Absolutely sickening. I sometimes come off a call. I'll only do 1 or 2 calls a day now, because it stays with me for the rest of the day. It drags my mood down, and you're just like, how has this happened? What are my colleagues doing? Telling somebody who's debilitated their mental.
Well, but here's the other thing I will say, and I talk about this a lot. Do you know that AI is going to replace all these GPs in like 4 or 5 years? Like, I'm not belittling all the training you've done, but see, at the end of the day, most GPs, I haven't been for years, but you go in, these are my symptoms, right? Here's your medicine. Like, surely an AI bot could do that. You just go in and talk to a screen, and then it gives you your medicine. Like, why do you need to pay a human being to do that? Is AI not going to revolutionize the whole health industry, and they won't need all these GPs?
Isn't that ironic? It's one of the warnings. This is one of the ironies. The last 2 years I've been trying to say, and you get told it's conspiracy. Now we've got AIs triaging. Now we've got AIs, even scribing. So the doctor goes in with the little mic, and you don't even write the notes up anymore. We are that close to being fully replaced. They're doing surgery now. They're doing prostatectomies. They're doing gallbladders and appendixes. Robotic surgeons. They don't want too many of these expensive, egotistical doctors for much longer. They're being replaced. So at least if you're being replaced, step up to the plate, stand your ground, and say, "Okay, I messed up. Actually, Dave Cartland was right," and all of his comrades.
A robot could soon do open heart surgery, brain surgery, couldn't it? No problems at all.
It's funny because a patient contacted me today and just said, this is she had I'm not naming names, so I can say she had a wrist problem, but she'd already AI'd it. And actually what I'd said to her in terms of my opinion, that was it matched the AI. So that's what happens. AI is there to sort of augment at the moment. But look, I have people come to me that have done the full, AI assessment, and it's better than any doctor, better than any professor. And I'm astounded by the level of detail, and it's all correct according to the. And they go in a 10-minute appointment with the GP.
I think that's the thing, people, and this is a kind of interesting discussion, because all these sort of regime jobs, like if you're a well-paid accountant, a well-paid lawyer, like a well-paid worker for the British state, AI is just going to do all that. So you won't need all these. It will absolutely eviscerate the middle class. And again, look, I'm not a socialist or a class warrior, but part of me is like, well, do you know what? You kind of deserve it for being such shite bags. And first of all, watching the country turn to shit, and then all the COVID stuff, and then everything since. And there's going to be a lot of rude awakenings for people. But there will still be a place for people who have respect, who have a following, and people actually have a relationship with, whereas like just these normie, middle class, well-paid people gone. AI will do it all.
They're going to be getting a rude awakening, like you say, not only with AI, the financial. I mean, all these crazy anti-vax conspiracy theorists, they're the ones who've got their, they've got their head in the game and they're prepping. They're getting ready for the next, whatever next looks like, whether that's AI or anything more sinister. Yeah. These guys are prepping in terms.
They are. One last quick one, David. My friend Phil sent me a super chat and he's asked about all the Epstein, Bill Gates, COVID planning stuff. I mean, obviously Bill Gates, who was a Saint Bill, that's worn off. What's been your take on that stuff coming out?
Well, I've just seen, I saw a couple of days ago, there's an email, wasn't there, about how to get rid of the poor people. That's the only one I've seen related to Bill Gates, but I've tried to stay away from it because it sickens me to the stomach. But, as you start scratching surfaces, you start seeing, beyond just a COVID scam, you see the big agenda that's playing out, and part of that agenda, well, the people running that agenda are dark people, put it that way without to find the details, but they seem to have an affinity for children. They seem to have affinity for dark arts and Satanism. And they don't care for the likes of us. We are the useless ones. We are the vermin. In fact, that's how they consider us. Telling us to turn our log burners off and eat X, Y, and Z while they're swanning out to WEF. So there's this kind of elite, inverted commas, that, and they all visited Epstein Island, as it would appear. So, it's hitting the fan. I mean, we're watching all the Labour guys running off left, right, and centre, rats to the sewer. It's all falling apart. It's a joy to watch, actually.
It is. It's certainly not happening quickly enough, and it's certainly not the justice that is needed isn't there. But it's good. David, thank you so much for giving up your time tonight. Obviously, it's been a very interesting chat about your journey, so to speak. And if people want to keep in touch with you or help you, but I think you've got some books. How can they do that? Is it best to just follow you on X?
I think that's the main point. Yeah, it's at Cartland David on X, and there are plenty of imposters. So it's at Cartland David, and there's links to different things like my YouTube channel. I'm doing some podcasting at the moment, speaking to other whistleblowers and vaccine injured people. You can find me on other social media platforms. They are growing over on Meta, Instagram, and Facebook. But the books are out. I've written this all down. There's a book called Do No Harm, which is my story from why I became a doctor to the decimation of my career. You might need a glass of wine if you read that. And I've done a poetry anthology as well. So part of my nocturnal therapy was to write poems. So I've written some pretty snarky poems.
And again, it's like, the thing is, if you have a half a brain and you're quite awake, the GMC are absolute, excuse my language, they're cunts. So is the MHRA. So is most of the NHS. And, if you really know what's going on, you don't have respect for any of these people. And that's why, so many of these professions, and as you said, like, look at the Royals now, look at how disgusting their behaviour is, the Labour Party, the political class, they're all kind of disgusting people. I mean, I don't know how most of them sleep in their bed at night. David, have you got any closing remarks for the viewers watching tonight?
That's a big one, actually. Yeah, just, we've got it's dark times, so, it's very easy to be sucked in and pulled into the darkness, but stick together. Just think, everything that we're doing at the moment is for the next generation. Think about your kids and your grandkids and let your behaviour be guided by that principle. Yeah, stay positive. There are evil. I won't use the exact word you use, but that word in this world. Just let them do their thing. They're imploding. It's a joy to watch. The pedos are being called out. The corruption's being called out. Watch their, ivory tower collapse. And there is going to be a great reset. The Great Reset isn't their planned Great Reset. There's going to be a time of freedom, and it's coming. It has to come because there's many more of us than them. There's more of us than them. So
that's true. But they've got the guns. I'm not suggesting anything, but that's the problem. Is that they're the ones in the power, and they've got the military and the police and the power and the money. But as you say, they don't have right on their side, and they don't have the truth on their side, and eventually it will catch up with them. David, thank you so much for giving up your time tonight. Good night, and let's get you on again sometime. Okay.
Anytime. Thanks for the interview, David. Take care of yourself.
Good night now. Bye-bye. Thank you. Let's get some D's in the chat, please, for David, and everyone go and follow him on X.